Many of you have probably seen the latest jobs report, and I know some of you asked me in the comments a couple days ago if I was going to make this video yesterday. But one thing you got to understand is that I'm always like a day behind. You know, I'm shooting this video and then you see it the next day or sometimes even the day after that. But rest assured, I am on it. And before we go over the most recent jobs report and what a disaster it was, I want to remind everybody that I made a video about a year ago, very similar to this one, when the downward revisions were actually far worse than they are right now. And I'm not saying this to defend how good these downward revisions are in any way. I just want to remind everybody that this is a problem that has been going on for a while now. Because take a look at this headline here. This is the exact story I referenced back at the end of August last year. U.S. job creation slashed by 818,000 and cements case for Fed interest rate cuts. Okay, well, let's look at what happened back then and then see the similarities of what's going on right now. Back then it said the U.S. added 118,000 fewer jobs between spring of 2023 and spring of 2024 than what was previously reported. And if you want to go watch that video, I have it linked down below. And they say in that story that this could prompt the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates more aggressively. And at that point, there were no Fed interest rate cuts, but as we all know, the first rate cut happened the following month in September. And so between April of 2023 and April of 2024, the government thought 2.9 million jobs were created, but it was only 2.1 million jobs. So a huge downward revision. And that downward revision that we had last year was actually the second largest one ever. And of course, the Fed's dual mandate is to keep inflation low, but also to keep unemployment low. And so fast forward to today, and the biggest downward revision so far this year, where we had about 258,000 jobs downward revised, is still very bad, but not nearly as bad as the 818,000 we had about a year ago. In May, they originally reported 144,000 jobs, got revised down to 19,000. In June was 147,000 jobs that got revised down to 14,000. And the latest July jobs numbers came in at 73,000, which was well below the estimates between 110 and 140K, essentially half of what they were predicting it would be, and most likely that number will get revised down too. And to make matters worse with this downward revision, unemployment stats ticked up a little bit as well from 4.1% to 4.2%, and wage growth slowed down to 3.9% year over year. So basically all of the numbers that the Fed looks at and a lot of high-level economists look at to see how the economy is doing are showing that things are really not that great. But somehow a lot of them just kind of shrug it off and say, Now the biggest jobs gain was in the education and health services sector, where they gained 79,000 jobs. Manufacturing lost 11,000 jobs, so it looks like so far the tariffs haven't really brought back those manufacturing jobs that everybody keeps saying that it will. And I understand that that's something that's supposed to take time, but I'm pretty sure everybody who's losing these jobs and everybody who needs money today probably would rather have it happen right now. Most people don't have years to wait until the new factory opens up and hopefully they can get a job there. You know what I mean? Could it be good in the long run if it actually happens? Yeah. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying it doesn't do much for folks right now. But I am all about some short-term pain for long-term gain. I'm just skeptical of whether or not we're going to get that. And the layoffs this year have been very prominent in the government jobs, where we've seen almost 300,000 government jobs lost since the beginning of the year. There's been about 89,000 tech jobs lost since the beginning of the year. And there's about 80,000 retail jobs that have been lost since the beginning of the year. And all of these job losses are due to, number one, the DOGE department. They've cut the most government jobs. Then you have a bad economy, poor economic conditions being another reason why this is happening. And a lot of stores are closing, a lot of businesses are closing because of the poor economic situation. And then, of course, we have AI taking over a lot of entry-level jobs these days due to its rapid advancement. And one thing I want to point out here that might have some significance for the U.S. housing market is when you look at the job cuts by region, by far, the largest region that was impacted by these job cuts is the East Coast and the Northeast, where job cuts are up 219% year over year, which has been heavily impacted by the federal job cuts, okay? And this is in contrast with the second largest region being the South at only 34% up year over year, still a lot, but nowhere near 219%. And the reason why that's important for the housing market is because the Northeast has been the last bastion of the never-ending increasing housing market, where pending home sales still haven't been falling, home prices are still up, inventory still low. But maybe now that we're seeing so many jobs being lost in the region, this might start to change in the future. And of course, this July jobs report is causing the market to bet that there's going to be about an 83% chance of a Fed rate cut at its next meeting in September, whereas previously it was only about a 41% chance. And you know, some people think that this is like just a slam dunk, right? This is a guarantee that the Fed now is going to cut interest rates because unemployment ticked up a little bit and we had this major downward revision in jobs. But I don't think it's really that cut and dry. Because when you look at what some of the FOMC members have to say about this most recent report, they don't seem to be too worried about it. New York Fed President John Williams, he described the labor market's trajectory as a gentle, gradual cooling, not a sharp downturn. So he's not too worried about this. And it's not like there was a massive uptick in unemployment. And when you look at the functional unemployment in this country, it's far worse at about 24% of people who are functionally unemployed, but they don't look at that. And the good thing is that John Williams seems to be much more focused on inflation because he has been really hammering the fact that we have persistent inflation pressures, especially in core inflation, which remember excludes food and energy, two of the three most important things people need. But he's still very bullish on the economy, thinking that the U.S. economy is still going to grow by 1% by the end of 2025. And then things are going to really pick up in 2026, and magically things are just going to get much better from here. Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack, she called the labor market healthy, but with disappointing signs, and she attributed the slower job growth partly to reduced immigration. I mean, the things that these people come up with sometimes to try to find excuses of why this is happening is just kind of laughable. I mean, let's face it. If it was because of reduced immigration, then what we would see is actually more job openings out there because there's less people here to fill it. You don't have to be a genius to see that. And back in the July Fed meeting, only 2 out of the 11 Fed members voted for a rate cut, and the rest of them voted to hold rates steady, and that's exactly what they did. Which shows you that the majority of the members of the Fed are still far more worried about inflation than they are about the labor market, or at least that's what they appear to be worried about. In my opinion, if they were really worried about inflation, they would be raising interest rates right now, not even considering a rate cut, even with this latest news. And FOMC members Bowman and Waller, they both issued warnings before this jobs report even came out about the labor market weakness, and are talking about how things are going to get worse unless they start cutting interest rates. And of course, that's what the Trump administration wants. The White House is blaming all of this on the uncertainty surrounding the tariff situation, and they believe that job growth might resume once the resolution of all these trade deals comes to a head. But I don't think any of this is a guarantee or a slam dunk that rate cuts are coming in September, because we're still going to have the August jobs report, which could end up being juiced to make this downward revision not look as bad as it looks right now. And also, I think the Fed has already kind of learned their lesson from last year. At least that's what I think, because it seems like the majority of the members are really not convinced that it's time to start lowering interest rates right now. 9 out of the 11 members are still more concerned about inflation than the labor market, and I think that's where their concerns need to be. Not saying that jobs aren't important, but what good is having a job if you can't afford to buy anything? But another interesting takeaway from this July jobs report is it confirms what a lot of people who have been looking for a job have been saying, which is that the job market really is that bad. Yeah, it is. Maybe it's even worse than what we've been told. In fact, this jobs report looks so bad that Trump had the BLS commissioner fired after this report came out because Trump essentially said that this was a major mistake and that the economy is booming under Trump. But when all of the data is actually pointing against that. But like I said, going back to the beginning of this video, all we got to do is rewind to a year ago before Trump was ever even president, and things were already not looking so good back then either. A lot of people like to blame all these things on the current president, just like people blamed that jobs report back in August of 2024 on Biden. But in reality, there are a lot larger economic roles at play here that the president cannot really influence. And it just goes to show you that economic policies haven't improved in a meaningful way if we're still getting these massive downward revisions for the jobs numbers, which is something else I predicted would continue to happen regardless of who's president. So part of the problem with the job market right now is that there are a lot of jobs available, but people don't have the skills for the type of work that's available. And a lot of the other jobs that are available are simply jobs that people can't afford to make a living wage at. Like if we look at all the healthcare jobs, for example, that were added, which were the largest amount of jobs added in this most recent July report, a lot of these positions that are available require specialized skill sets, education, and training. So the reality is most people just aren't qualified for a lot of those positions. Here's an example of a guy that was laid off back in 2021 from a sales engineering job. And since then, he has been underemployed, essentially doing jobs that don't fit his skill set. Underemployed is when you're working a job beneath what you're actually qualified to do just so you can have money and make ends meet and bring in an income. And think about it, this guy's been underemployed for the last 4 years. Another woman, she said she's applied to about 512 jobs and landed about 20 interviews so far, mostly from referrals from people that she knows. And despite working in tech for over 2 decades, she's been considering alternative non-corporate career paths like teaching, because tech is one of those industries right now that's completely in the gutter, mainly due to overhiring during the pandemic and the advancement of AI. And this kind of reinforces the idea that the job market has been tough for a while. This goes beyond just the last few months here or even last year. Things have been not that great since the hiring boom we saw during the pandemic. And this is what I mean. Take a look at this. Job openings have slowed from over 12 million job openings in March of 2022 to only 7.4 million as of June of 2025. So we have almost half the amount of jobs available right now than we had just 3 years ago. And when you look at the reality of that, most of those jobs, or at least half of them, aren't even real jobs. A lot of them are ghost job listings that are either expired or are just up there to make the company look like they're hiring, but really have no intention of ever filling any of these roles. I'm sure a lot of people out there who are looking for work right now can corroborate that statement and verify what I'm saying. Another guy in Michigan says he's been searching for a job for almost 3 years now, and he's applied to over 2,000 jobs, and he's only had 4 interview requests. I mean, that's just so disheartening, guys. I couldn't even imagine being in this situation. It's really awful. And he said he's just looking for a customer support job or operations job. Another guy who was recently laid off from IT support in a manager role, in his 2 months that he's been looking for a job, he said he's applied to about 100 jobs and has only had 3 interviews. Well, I guess that's much better than applying to 2,000 and only getting 4. So a lot of people are just being forced into taking a low-paying job right now just to be able to make something and just deal with being underemployed. You know, last year when I walked past this neighborhood and past this house, I thought this house was abandoned, and now I see stuff inside this house and there's a bunch of no trespassing signs. It makes me wonder if a squatter moved into this abandoned house in this beautiful neighborhood. This is like the only house that looks like crap compared to all these other beautiful homes around here. And you know, a lot of people are still blaming this job market being bad on the tariff situation. But in reality, looking backwards, the job market hasn't been good for a long time, well before the tariffs were ever even introduced. That's just the latest scapegoat to say why it's not good. But what it really means is that the economy is not nearly as good as what we've been told pretty much since the run-up in the pandemic. Because I would argue to say that things were kind of just going okay before the pandemic. It's never been perfect, but compared to right now, I think almost everybody would prefer the economy we had pre-pandemic compared to today. And the thing is, you can't just inject $6 trillion worth of cash into the economy, let people run amok with it, let all of the fraud, waste, and abuse happen with that money, and see a lot of it pour into investments like real estate, gold and silver, Bitcoin, and stocks, and just think that everything's just going to kind of balance itself out. And while that is starting to happen, it is definitely a lopsided balance so far. And one other thing I think is kind of interesting to explore, which is related to this, is you see everybody going on vacation and going to these beautiful destinations right now. How are people affording all of this while the job market is in the toilet? While the economy is apparently so bad. That's one of the things I always get pushback with against in the comments, saying, well, I just went to the restaurants last night, Michael, everything was full, the mall was full, the airplane flights are full, as if that's some sort of indicator of how good the economy is doing. Well, there was actually a story that came out about this, and they asked people how they're affording to go on all these summer vacations. Because you see people going to Italy and France and Greece for a few weeks and going to all these luxurious places. And it's just like, wow, how can these people do all that? People are chartering yachts. They're going to European villas with ocean views, all kinds of things like that. Now, first of all, a lot of people are tricked into thinking everyone's having the time of their life by looking at their Facebook and Instagram posts and their other social medias, thinking that, wow, these people are living it up while I'm stuck over here working. But here's how they're really paying for it. One reason is someone else is actually paying. Yeah, that's right. Here's one woman that says she gets a lot of trips paid for through her job, who works for a hotel. She says the downside of the free travel, though, is that you don't always get to pick your destination, but at least I get to go places. Other people are staying with family or friends who live abroad, which makes vacation super cheap. You know, if you don't have to pay for a place to stay, which is always the most expensive thing, then essentially someone else is subsidizing your vacation. Here's what one person said: I'm using my savings to go to Italy to visit family for the summer. I'm not financially stable right now, and this is going to cost me about $2,700, but it's super important to me and it's worth it. And they don't even say how they're spending that $2,700, considering that they're not financially stable. My guess is putting it on the credit card or buy now, pay later. And another example of people living off of others and letting somebody else pay for their trip is this right here. My best friend invited me to Europe, and when I told him I couldn't afford it right now because I'm in between jobs, he covered my entire trip. I'm still paying for my flight and meals, but he's paying for the rest. And then, of course, people have rich parents. My mom and dad paid for it. The bank of mom and dad is always the biggest financier of just about everything these days. And then, of course, a lot of people are putting it on the credit card. Here's a girl, 28, who lives in North Carolina. She says she's going to Spain and Portugal this summer, and she spent $2,100 on the trip so far, all on her credit card, and hopes to pay it off over the next year. She says, I'm only young and single once. When I'm older, I'll have other responsibilities, and I think I'll look back on this time fondly. Yep, you're going to be looking back on this a year from now wondering, why the hell did I do that? Because now I owe the credit card company $4,000 instead of $2,100 because of all the interest payments. Other people are doing house swaps, or they're not paying rent. For example, there's a platform called Home Exchange, and for a $235 annual fee, it allows you to trade homes with other members around the world. Another girl, 33 years old in LA, decided not to renew her lease. She put all her stuff in storage, and she's spending her rent money, which is about $2,700 a month, on a trip to Europe for the next few weeks. Now, I think that's actually the smartest one so far, because you're not actually spending any extra money, right? You put your stuff in storage. You're not spending any more money than you were already spending just living your regular life. So far, that's actually the smartest idea, and I like that one a lot. Other people really obsess about their credit card points and how many rewards points they get, and they kind of just do like points arbitrage where they just, use 5 or 10 different credit cards and all these different points, and it adds up to enough points where they can transfer over to an airline and get a plane ticket for free, hotel travel for free, or a lot cheaper anyways. And people are also strategic about the type of hotels that they pick. Somebody said that it's worth getting the cheapest room at the fanciest hotel, and this person travels to Europe for at least a week with her husband every summer. That's some interesting advice. I've never thought about that. But when you do that, your room might be small, but you get the same access to all the amenities and concierge services and all these things that feel and look super luxurious that people see on your social media, but they don't realize that you're staying in the shack and not the penthouse. Other people are very diligent savers and planners, and that's how they pay for all this stuff. They can plan their trip like a year in advance and then just spend the rest of the time saving up for their trip. This woman says she works most of the year, 11-hour days, and she saves half of what she makes, and then every summer she blocks her schedule and goes overseas. This summer she's going away for a month, and she's been planning it since last fall. I don't do any of the fancy stuff or eat out when I'm at home. Travel is my thing. And then, of course, the most obvious answer for people who are spending all this money are the people who are just rich and they just have the money. Not everybody has to go in debt to go on these luxurious vacations. They can actually afford it, which is kind of becoming a minority these days, but that does exist as well. And some people ask, like, well, how do you get to come to California for, 4 or 5 months out of the year, Michael? How do you afford that? Well, I don't have any kids. I don't spend much money on anything. I don't have any debt or any ongoing payments or bills. So I'm able to save money to do this every year. It's not hard to save money when you don't have many expenses, guys. And I'm not saying this to brag or anything like that. I'm just telling you, like, that's how I'm able to do it. And the biggest incentive for me to live life that way is I really don't like summers in Miami due to the heat and the hurricanes. So that's a big motivator for me to be, not a huge spender and save a lot of my money towards coming out here in the summer. But going back to the jobs report and how things are going, guys, I would not be expecting things to turn around or get drastically better anytime soon. In fact, it's probably just going to continue to get worse. And it reinforces what I said a few days ago, that no matter what the Fed does at this point, it's going to be bad for the economy. If they raise the interest rates, the job market and the unemployment's probably going to get even worse. If they leave everything the same, it's still going to get worse, just at a slower clip. If they lower interest rates, inflation's going to come roaring back, as it already kind of is, but even faster. But maybe we'll get a few extra jobs. So no matter what they do, we're going to be in for a ride for a while. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.